right, friends, welcome to the show. Greg Kokel here, and this is the last show of the year. I mean, that's hard to imagine in a way. The year's gone, save for 3 days, right? Does the saying go? The days drag on and the years fly by, and that's the way it seemed this year. Lots of draggy days, lots of work to do. I did so much traveling this year. Slowed down a little bit here in the fall, I should say, in just before Thanksgiving, because that's when I started my surgery stuff, and I got more that's been going on, and some more early next year. But what a year it's been. And as I look back on Stand to Reason, my reflection has been, as people ask me about how is STR doing, now our 31st year plus and counting, 31 and a half, is that we have been in a bull market for over 3 decades. And that's the way it's been. I have like a tiger by the tail. I mean, just this last year, we started our outposts about 2 years ago, and now we're over 150 of them. And I'm just saying 150 is a round figure because last I heard it was 151 and 152, and that was a while back. So I'm sure more have been added. We're in 9 different countries. We're in 38 different states. And I know part of the goal is to get every single state represented with an outpost. When I look at the reality events that we've done over the year, we've had more than 12,500 students attend those, and leaders and parents as part of our reality student apologetics conferences. It's unbelievable. We increased the number of STR University learners by 50% this last year, 15,350 registered for 26 STRU courses. We completed a new documentary. It hasn't been released yet. It will premiere soon. The documentary is titled One Solitary Life. And one of the coolest things that happened this year, towards the end of the year, is we brought Craig Hazen on board. He's the architect and the director, had been, of Biola's wildly successful master's program, MA program in apologetics. It set the stage, set the pace for a whole bunch of other programs that have sprung up around the country at different universities, but they're all chasing Biola. Well, he's no longer with Biola. He's with us at Stand to Reason, bringing his talents and his capabilities, his skills, his experience, all of that to our organization as a strategic planner for us. I think we call him the CSO, Chief Strategy Officer. That's Craig. I mean, this is an incredible amount of things that have been accomplished this year. Now, I'm telling you these things for 2 reasons. For one, we didn't do any of this ourselves. We have a whole team, a massive team of faithful financial partners who have made this possible. And so whenever I talk about something that God is doing through Stand to Reason, He has accomplished an end because there are means involved that have made the ends not just possible, but actual, the things I've read. And so if you have been someone who has given to Stand to Reason, either as a strategic partner on a monthly basis, as a challenge donor towards the end of the year, or just here and there, wherever you've given, I just want to say thank you. Because we have been able to move full steam ahead because we've had a great cadre of financial partners that has allowed us to do that. However, full steam ahead looks different next year than it did this year. Obviously, we want to get Craig into play, but there's a whole bunch of other ideas that he has that relate to expanding the impact of Stand to Reason. I gave you some metrics already from last year, but next year it's going to be so much more, God willing. And that's why if you have been someone who's been giving to Stand to Reason to make this happen, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to ask you, especially these last few days of the year, to double down. Yes, you've been giving, great. Maybe you're giving on a monthly basis. You've already given your $50 or $100 or $200 for the month. Thank you. Why not just double down this month? Can you imagine the impact of every individual strategic partner, for example, just doubled down for 1 month? I know there are going to be people who give at the end of the year, and you got to give by the end of this year, postmark the 31st, if you're mailing a gift, in order for it to count for this year. But I want to encourage you to help us, please, finish out this year really, really strong so that we can have a report like this that we offer you this time next year, okay? And I'm just talking now to all of our partners, and I'm asking you thank you for what you've done and asking to double down this month or better. But there's a whole bunch of you that haven't participated, and that's okay. We are happy to serve you regardless. Our philosophy from the very outset at Stand to Reason has been that we want to give before we ever ask to receive. And even if we never receive, we want to keep giving to you because our goal is to build the body of Christ, regardless of your responsiveness to us. However, of course, if you do receive from us anything valuable, it's perfectly appropriate to say thank you with a gift. Not just for what you received, but to make a down payment on what others will receive next year. So if you're not somebody who's part of our financial team, I want you to consider doing that in the next 3 days. To make your presence known with a gift, you can do it online at str.org. That's easy. You can write a check to Stand to Reason, postmark it by the 31st, however you like to do it. But we want you on board. We want to bring you on our team. And we'd love to have you so that we can do more than we ever have done before. And by the way, we are positioned to do that. Now, I don't ask for financial help hardly ever. Month of December is the one exception, and this is the last chance I get to do it for this December. And so I'm asking for your help. Now, we have a dedicated group of Stand to Reason partners who have already pledged $325,000 for their end-of-year giving as a challenge to the rest of you. As a challenge to the rest of you. And they're asking you to step up to the challenge with your donation so that collectively the rest of you can match or hopefully exceed that $325,000 amount. But that's up to you, okay? Whatever you can give, however you can do it, I would personally appreciate it. So would the rest of my team. And as we expand, there'll be more members of our team that are going to appreciate what you have done for us that extends, the impact of which extends into next year. And by the way, if you give a gift for us, you make your end-of-year gift to Stand to Reason by Saturday, December 28th, which is tomorrow. All right? We'll send you Justin Brierley's new book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Now, I read this book, and it's really encouraging. It's encouraging to see what God is doing in secular circles, persuading people that he is real, and especially that specifically Christianity is sound and true. And Justin chronicles these things in this particular book. It's a riveting read, frankly. And he tells a story of people changing their minds about God. So I want to send it to you because I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did. And if you get your gift in by the 27th or make that the 28th, and you could do that online if you'd like to do that, that's the simplest way to do it. Then we'll send you that book as a way of saying thank you. But whether it's 28th or 29th or 30th or 31st, if it's all this year, it helps us for this year's budget. And it propels us into next year effectively. So there you have it. My last appeal to you for giving, for encouraging you to be a partner with us financially until next December. All right? So let's go to some open mic calls here, and I've got a whole list of them that I want to go through. And by the way, thank you for sending your open mic calls, and my apologies in advance that sometimes it takes a while to get to your call. But I have all the papers here, all the pages, and as I'm able, I work right through them and work down the list. So we'll eventually get to that. By the way, if you have an open mic call, basically the way this works is you call us or go online to our website at str.org, and at the homepage you see a section called podcast, and under live podcast you can follow the links and then leave your question. And we'll take the recording and we'll store it and then eventually get to it so that it gives you an opportunity to weigh in with a question, even though you're not able to or willing to hold online during our live show. So let's start with Julie Steiger, and she has a question, an interesting question. Let's just put it that way. Julie?
Hi, Greg. This is Julie Steiger from Silverdale, Washington. First of all, I wanted to thank you on your information about how God speaks to us and the 3 ways that you have to be wary of. The one about God dropping hints. I think I wrote a rebuttal, and I think I understand more so now what you're saying. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Because it is something that's difficult for me to understand fully, having been raised the way I was raised. But my question is, doesn't have to do with that. It has to do with there is a member of my council at the church, member of the council at the church, who is going to be entering a physique show. A physique show is like a bodybuilding competition. It's a competition where people get up on stage and show off their bodies. Okay. The men wear board shorts and the women wear basically bikinis. I feel like this is something where it's worshiping the body. And I don't feel like it's something that a member of the church council especially should be participating in. And he's like he influences so many people in the church, and he has this program that he does once every month with the men. And I don't know. I don't know how to come to any conclusion about it. So I just was wondering what you thought. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Julie, thank you for that. Never had that question before. I do want to speak just a moment to your prior comments, talking about how you're struggling with trying to get your head around my point of view, my position, which I think is a sound biblical position, that God doesn't drop hints about things that he wants us to do. And to put it simply, and this does relate to a whole aspect of decision-making, and many of the regular listeners are totally familiar with my concerns about this. In fact, my last book, which I'll be embarking upon shortly, is at least the working title is Does God Whisper? And the answer in the way most people are thinking of that concept is no. God doesn't whisper, and he doesn't mumble, and he doesn't drop little hints. If he wants you to do something, he speaks it loudly and clearly. And in fact, every single example we have of God speaking to anyone in Scripture is an example of that. There's no mumbling. In fact, Paul speaks in a certain sense against that when he was talking about tongues with interpretation as being appropriate, as opposed to tongues with no interpretation. Because how will it be known what is being said unless you speak with words that are clear? That's from 1 Corinthians 14, almost verbatim. All right? So if God is going to say something to us that he wants us to know, he is going to speak with clarity. And virtually in every single case where we have detail of the phenomenology of God's communication to someone, extra-biblical communication to someone, he has spoken clearly. Even Saul, who was unregenerate and persecuting Christians, had no difficulty hearing God when Jesus said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So maybe there's the nugget there you might want to chew on. I understand there's a whole host of folks, and there's a lot of tradition, received tradition about decision making in the body of Christ that believes that God is dropping little hints that we have to decipher. Well, all I'm saying is that way of looking at God guiding us is not biblical, and in fact, arguably, it's contrary to the Bible's teaching. If you keep in mind the lesson of the bugle that Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 14 that I just referred to. Now, on to the other issue. More could be said about that, of course, but I'm going to move on to the bodybuilder, okay? And there are actually two questions. Is this worshiping the body to be involved in a bodybuilder enterprise or contest? And is it something appropriate for a church leader to be participating in? I don't think that it is necessarily an example of worshiping the body. If that were the case, then even beauty pageants would be off the charts in that sense. I think the word worshiping is too strong of a word, okay? And I think that, I haven't really thought my own view through regarding so-called beauty contests, but they don't seem particularly objectionable to me, although I think they can be taken to an objectionable extreme. We've had people who were part of our larger Stand to Reason community who were participating in statewide contests like that, like Miss Alabama or something like that, and had questions about how they would comport themselves during the Q&A sessions where they had to answer certain questions about particular things, say, in this case, same-sex marriage. And, I answered the question and gave some help, but it didn't occur to me at the time to think, well, your daughter shouldn't be involved in that at all. That didn't occur to me because it's not obviously the case to me. Now, it strikes me that maybe a bodybuilding contest may be a parallel example. Although I realize there's less clothing involved and there's nothing to do with personality or other kinds of skills. It is just simply a display of musculature. And that does make me a little bit more uncomfortable. Again, I don't know that it's worshiping the body. I don't think that's what's going on. But it may be too much of a focus on something physical. Maybe if you had a contest where it says, I'm in a contest and it's a face contest, and what we're trying to find out is who is the most beautiful woman in the world. And so I entered the contest so that I might maybe win the accolade most beautiful woman in the world. Now, that would strike me as a bit unusual. And I'm not exactly sure how to characterize my discomfort. I don't think it's worshiping, but I do think it's an inappropriate focus. Now, there's another side to this. And when I was a fairly new Christian, I lived in a Christian community, and there was a guy there who was a bodybuilder. Now, he always was completely draped. He's a big guy, but he had sweatshirts on and stuff. He didn't walk around in, string tees or whatever we used to call them, Cicero tees from Chicago. Other people call them wife beaters. But those string tees where it's all muscle bulging and just very little clothing, like it's all a show off. I see people walking around the airport like this. Now, that seems to be inappropriately drawing a lot of attention to themselves. He wasn't like this, but he was a bodybuilder. I don't even know if he was in competitions or not. But, we have athletic competitions. How about this one? Football, baseball, basketball, right? So there are all kinds of competitions where people are showing off their physical prowess in a way that we celebrate and enjoy, and it doesn't seem that we are doing anything inappropriate when we do that. So maybe there's a parallel here, but I will tell you, I am a little bit uncomfortable with it. There is a certain athleticism that's being focused on in bodybuilding. I mean, at least arguably, although it's not skill that one is judging, it is looks that one is judging. And that might put it in a different category. So I don't think it's worshiping the body, and I think it can be taken on as an athletic endeavor. But I think when people do it for competitive reasons and they go out and they compete as a bodybuilder, all they're doing is flexing and displaying their body to get an award. That just seems odd to me. So I'm not in favor of that, I guess I would say it. And I am open to a contrary view. Though it's a kind of athletics and it takes physical exercise to excel in this particular thing, it isn't in the standard sense an athletic exercise because there's no athletic skill that is manifest. It's just the ability to build muscles that look big. And therefore, all the assessment is just based on the looking. And that's why it just seems to me this is probably not a virtuous enterprise for a Christian to pursue. Trying to look the most muscular in your group strikes me as a vice, not as a virtue. Just like it's one thing to try to look your best when you're going out, but to try to look like I'm trying to be the most beautiful person in my group, doesn't it seem that that crosses a line a little bit? So on at least prima facie, on its face, I guess maybe that's a kind of a pun, I think it's suspect. It's not virtuous. Now, we've added something, though, as you have, and that is, I don't think it's worshiping the body, but I do think it could be, what's the right word, egotistical, maybe that's not the self-aggrandizing or something like that, drawing attention to oneself in a way that's not appropriate. It's not, it's certainly not the virtue of humility. Anyway, but now if you have a pastor doing it, this adds another element. Even if it wasn't questionable on its face, that a pastor now who has a role as a spiritual leader is involved in an enterprise where his scantily clad body is itself on display for viewing, and people can judge its muscular beauty, that seems to me to be unwise. I would, if one of the members of my team wanted to do that, I'd say, no, don't do that. That's not a virtuous direction for you to go. And even if it were, it looks bad. There's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to be troubled by this. And let me give you a parallel circumstance, not exactly parallel, but something similar. I've gotten some complaints because I've used the acronym OMG. Now that could be oh my God, or it could be oh my gosh. And sometimes I say OMG as in gosh, or OM gosh, so people don't think I'm using the G to refer to God, which would trouble some people. Now, in my view, saying, oh my God, is not a problem. I don't think that's a violation of God's purposes or whatever. But that's my own personal view. Even though I don't think it's a vice, even the acronym can cause problems with some people, and so I'm just not going to say it without qualification at least. O-M, gosh, for example. Because I don't want people to even begin thinking that in the role that I play as a Christian influencer, leader, however you want to characterize it, that I am playing fast and loose with God's name. Even though I don't think I am, they might think I am, so why go there? No skin off my nose. So there are times when you have what might be argued to be a morally neutral activity that annoys enough Christians to the degree that it's better that you just don't even go there because there's no real upside and there's a lot of downside. And certainly, I think this would fall into that category. Now, a person who's going into this enterprise, bodybuilding, for the sake of having a contest, physique show, may have the best of intentions and may be very virtuous, but it doesn't look good. And that's a good enough reason not to do it. Now, of course, these are judgment calls. Some things don't look good that are really minor things that most people wouldn't give a second thought to. You got to decide whether you're going to do it or not. But some things are like a lot more obviously that don't look right, and therefore probably should take a pass on it. Anyway, that's my take on it. And there may be alternate opinions, and maybe I'll hear about it from some of you. That's okay. I'm not really dogmatic about it, but it just doesn't seem quite right. All right, let's take a break. Thank you, Julie, for that question. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Stay with us. We have some more questions here, open mic questions. And let's just go to Paul, all right? He's next on the list. Paul?
Hey, Greg and Amy. Again, love the show. Thank you for all the work that you guys do. Looking forward to future episodes. So one of the things that I really appreciate about you, Greg, is Amy, I'm not so sure about where you stand on this, but Greg you've expressed that you have a Calvinistic view of salvation, soteriology, and yet you associate, you recommend, you don't distance yourself from other people who do apologetics who do not hold the Calvinistic view of soteriology. For instance, like Frank Turek or William Lane Craig. And so that's really helpful. I actually came to learn about you through Frank Turek. And so my question to you is, what is a good way to approach getting information or resources from other Christians who are not Calvinistic, or more broadly, who don't necessarily agree like maybe like I agree in all areas of Scripture? And so I'm not even saying this to indicate that I believe Calvinistically about salvation, but just rather as a Christian, how can we glean from other Christians who maybe we don't agree with in all areas and still benefit from them?
Well, that's a good question, Paul. It's not a particularly hard one for me. Obviously, if Frank doesn't hold my view, but he commended me to you, he doesn't hold the view against me either. Most of the colleagues that I have are not Reformed. And by the way, I prefer the term Reformed rather than Calvinistic, because Calvinistic, though it entails sovereign grace, it entails a bunch of other things that Calvin might have taught that I may not agree with. So Calvinism is like Lutheranism, that the doctrine is the person who believes in that system believes in what that system's teacher established, where Reformed theology is broader than Calvinism. And I'm not confessional, for example, and I don't hold to all of the particulars of Reform, or I should say Reformed or Calvinistic teaching. Certainly I'm not covenantal in my understanding of how things work out are more dispensational, but that's another issue. Just pointing out, I refer to myself as Reformed, and Amy is definitely Reformed. She's more Reformed than I am, I'd say, in some ways. But so the question is, how do I get along with my friends who don't share that view? And the way I do is I don't make it an issue because it ought not be an issue. It may be a point of discussion. And I can remember, a couple of years ago with some colleagues, I was doing an event sponsored by another colleague, and there were other speakers there. We all went out to dinner afterwards, and it came out somehow in the discussion that I was Reformed in my view, and they were, to a person, mortified. Mortified. How could you possibly believe that? Of course, and we had a very friendly discussion, and I didn't take umbrage at their surprise. I did learn a lesson from that interaction, and the lesson that I learned is that most people ask the wrong questions when it comes to that issue, because their question is, well, what about this? What about that? What about the other thing? Why do evangelism if sovereign grace is what the Bible actually teaches, election in that sense? Because the Bible teaches election, the word's in there. It teaches predestination because the word's in there. We have to look closely at what it means by that word and how those words and how they're applied in the text to get a proper understanding. But nevertheless, they're in there. Do you believe in election? Of course. Why would everybody should believe in election? It's taught in the Scripture. Now, how you cash that out is going to be different. But here's my point. I think my friends are asking the wrong question. What they ought to ask the question of is, what does the Bible teach regarding salvation? Once you come to a determination of what the Bible teaches regarding salvation, then you have to answer the outliers. Well, if that's true, then what about? But it's not, you can't answer my what about, so therefore this isn't true if the text seems to support it. And this is the way I've approached the whole question. I'm reading the text and the straightforward statements that it makes regarding salvation. And God opened Lydia's heart to believe the gospel. And as many as are appointed to eternal life were saved. For example, no one can come to me, Jesus says, unless the Father draws them, and all that the Father gives to me, I lose nothing but raise them up in the last day. You are not listening to me. You aren't, quote unquote, hearing my voice because you don't belong to me. The Father has not given you to me. Now, these are very, very strong verses that I've quoted virtually verbatim that seem to me to make a very unequivocal statement about the nature of election. Now, that does raise other questions, but I think the other questions can be answered. And one of those questions is, well, all these verses talk about choosing. Yeah, they do. Well, how does that make sense? Well, I'll tell you, there is a place for choosing in the Reformed view, okay? But it's not like an autonomous choice, a choice I make without any other influence, okay? That needs to be cashed out. I'm not going to try to make my case here. I'm trying to make the point about how I discuss this with other people. Now, if others disagree, like Frank, I mean, Frank thinks that if we are elected in the Calvinist sense, the Reformed sense, then there's no freedom to love, and without freedom, love isn't genuine. God can't force us to love. Well, I think that's a total mischaracterization of the issue, and we've talked about it. He hasn't bought it. Fine. He's still one of my closest friends. The gospel is still the gospel, proclaimed the way we all proclaim it. We don't say, us Reformed folk, we don't say, will the elect please come forward? No, we offer the message just the way it's offered in the New Testament, and those who believe will believe. Now, when we look more deeply into the theology of what's going on, anthropology, the nature of soteriology, grace, etc., I think the conclusion that's right to be drawn is that God has to make this happen, or else it's not going to happen at all. But other people can come to different conclusions. So, since it, on my view at least, this doesn't separate the men from the boys, the true Christians from the false Christians, this issue. You can have, obviously, a difference of opinion and be a great Christian. Now, both can't be right. Somebody's mistaken. Maybe I'm mistaken. But if I have this attitude in my heart of a willingness to engage with reasons and a willingness to listen, and that's an important part too, a willingness to listen to the other side, we can have a spirited discussion. I mean, it's not just Bill Craig and Frank Turek. Virtually every philosopher I know, virtually every, not all, but is a libertarian, Arminian, including J.P. Moreland. But these are people that I've worked with for years. I've learned tons from. I've disagreed on some issues with all of them. But other things I've gained tremendously from as well. And so I'm able to, happily eat the meat and throw away the bones and not let the bones get in the way of my relationship with good brothers and sisters in Christ who happen to believe differently than I do on an issue that's not a article of faith. We can have a different point of view and still be within the fold. And it's just not hard for me. So I guess the reason that I'm thinking about the question, I don't distance myself from apologists who differ from me on soteriology. Well, why? Because they've got lots of other things to offer. And some of them may be willing to listen to what I have to say and change their mind. Don't know. I changed my mind over time, and I've seen a lot of people that over time have changed their mind on this particular issue when confronted with passages that they felt were compelling. So people do change their mind. Some go the other direction. JP used to be more Calvinistic, Reformed, and now he's more Arminian. So there you go. People move around. But they're still friends and they're still colleagues and they're still part of the family. And I want to be close with them and I want to learn from them and maybe have them learn from me. By the way, I don't even know where everybody on our own team at Stand to Reason stands on this. It isn't like we're having these discussions all the time. We have had with some people. And, it's just a matter of friendly discussion, see where they're at, and asking questions. And that's my MO for dealing with all these things. Columba 1, Columba 2, Columba 3. And okay. But let me just go back to a procedural issue, though, on this particular issue, and that is you've got to start with the right questions. And the right question is, what does the Bible teach? It's not the right question to ask, well, if that's true, what about this? First, we have to figure out what's true as best we can from the text. And when we do that, then we have to solve the other problems. By the way, with regards to the question, what's the point of evangelism if people are already chosen by God, I have a simple question. Was Jesus chosen, elected by God, predestined to die on a cross approximately 33 AD at the hands of Roman soldiers? Yes. Right. Then why did Joseph take him to Egypt when he was an infant? Well, because his life was being threatened by Herod, and God told him, take him to Egypt. Now, why didn't Joseph say, wait a minute, I read the prophecies. Our son is going to die in 33 years. That's what you determined to have taken place. Let Herod take his best shot. He's not going to be able to kill Jesus because he's not predestined to die now. He is predestined to die in 33 years. The point I'm making here is God has certain ends, but he has means to accomplish those ends. He tells David, you're going to be king. And then David had to fight his entire life, first against Saul and then later against Absalom, to keep his kingship that God had given him. God told David, you're going to... David goes to God and he says, shall I go up against them in battle? Will I defeat them? Yes, you're going to defeat them. I will give them into your hands. Now, God says, set an ambush. Here's your battle plans. Wait a minute. You just said you're going to defeat them. I'm just going to sit back and drink tea and watch these guys die at the hand of your angels or whatever. No, God promised the end but ordains the means. These are intricately connected. And we see this time and time and time again through the Scripture. So there is no internal kind of contradiction or problem with the idea that God elects for salvation, and we have to do something so that people can respond with faith for their salvation. They go hand in hand. Now, this is not making the case for sovereign grace. That's made by individual verses. This is just answering a defeater to it, saying you can have sovereign grace and still have means that are necessary to the ends, the means in this case being the proclamation of the gospel. All right? Thank you, Paul, for that. Okay. Joshua has a question about baptism in a different religion. Let's hear from Joshua. Josh?
What is your stance on whether a Christian can attend a baptism for a different religion? Do you think it's analogous to the situation with a same-sex wedding, for example, where it's inherently celebrating the event that goes against the Christian views?
There's an ambiguity here, Joshua, and that is the phrase different religion. I'm presuming, based on the way you phrased it, that different religion means a totally different religion as opposed to a different denomination. So we could have a person who's a Baptist then go to a baptism. So Baptists usually believe in Christian baptism. That means adults should be baptized, but they might go to a Presbyterian church where a child is baptized, contrary to their view, the Baptists' view. Would that be wrong? I don't think that's wrong. I think it's mistaken. I think pedal baptism or child baptism is not a real baptism, but I'm looking across the way to my Lutheran friend here through the window, and he has a different view on that. That's okay. I don't have any difficulty with that kind of interaction on baptisms. I don't know what other kind of baptism there would be, though, because Jews don't baptize and Hindus don't baptize, and so I'm not sure. Let's just say there was a religion that had a religious ceremony like Amy just said, what about Mormons? Because Mormons baptize for the dead also. They baptize in their church too. I'm pausing here because I haven't really thought about this before. I certainly wouldn't go to a baptism for the dead, but I don't think those are public events. Anyway, no. Amy's shaking her head no. And I actually... now that you mentioned about same-sex marriage, I think there may be a parallel there. Because in same-sex marriage, the problem is it's a celebration. Your presence there is part of the celebration of an event that is dishonoring to God. And so if you go to a false religious practice to celebrate the practice, and Mormonism is a false religion. Now, some people may take umbrage at that, but educated Mormons would say the same thing about you, that you have a false religion, because that's what Joseph Smith said, that the denominations that were available to him in Palmyra, New York, when he was getting his revelations about Mormonism were abominations according to God. Therefore, it's a bit disingenuous for Mormons to posture as if they're Christians when, in fact, they don't think we are, and they think they are. they can't make common cause with abominable denominations. But nevertheless, that's what's going on now. That's another issue, but I'm just saying. So I guess my point of view now would be that, no, you shouldn't go to a celebration of any kind, religious or otherwise, in which the celebration itself is offensive to God or represents an offense to God. Sound good, Amy? Yeah, she's kind of nodding. Just checking with Amy. Since somebody mentioned Amy, who was that just a few moments ago? Amy's not on this show. She's on the other show. But she does help me out on this show. So that would be my sense. What do we got next? How would you respond? Okay. Oh, let's go to Audra. Audra. Hope I said that right.
Hello, Greg. My name is Audra.
Did.
I just have a question about something I saw on social media. A friend posted something and it said, "Pride is important because someone tonight still believes they're better off dead than being gay." Just was wondering how you would respond to that. Thanks so much.
Yes, Audra, I got the name right. Plus, she's Canadian. I could tell it right there in the about part. I think she is. These kinds of questions, I'm glad you asked it. But when the people say this kind of thing, is really what I mean. It bugs me. It bothers me because what they are saying is if somebody does something foolish because of the view I hold, then I'm responsible for the foolish thing they do. And this is passive aggressive. It's passive because it sounds like, oh, I'm just trying to be loving to this person who is trying to kill themselves, but it's aggressive because it's putting the responsibility of their suicide, alleged suicide or whatever, eventual suicide, on the Christian for thinking that homosexuality is wrong. And of course, this is a line that's repeated over and over and over again by the left. And it's manipulative. I don't think that there is I know that people who are same-sex attracted, and especially those who are transgender, or who have gender dysphoria, have excessively high suicide rates, certainly attempts, but they're all really high. But I have no reason to believe that the reason they're committing suicide is because Christians disagree with them. There is no more of a persona non grata group, unwelcome group, vilified group in this country than Christians. And I don't see this wave of suicides being performed by Christians because people don't like them or they're bugged at them or call them names on a regular basis. So why should I believe that that's the case with someone who's gay or transgender? They're dying because of me? Because I disapprove? Even that someone would say that is an indication of the how I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. This is so beyond the pale, it's clear that it's not true. Let's put it that way. All right? It's hard to imagine anything that gets applauded more in our culture, really, for a group of people than homosexuality and transgender. There is an entire month that the entire country is applauding homosexuality. The government flies homosexual flags, gay flags from the embassies all over the world. The military has a whole celebration. And then somebody's going to kill themselves because a Christian doesn't affirm it? This is evidence of something else. The impulse to suicide in those circumstances is not coming from the disapproval of Christians. It's coming from something else. I acknowledge the impulse is there, but it's not coming from Christians for the reasons I just mentioned. And by the way, even and I think I have the statistic here footnoted in the 10th anniversary edition of Tactics, in Sweden, where there is a much more sanguine perspective about these things, the suicide rates are the same. There isn't this environmental pressure. By the way, a variation of this statement, pride is important because someone tonight believes they're better off dead than being gay. Another variation is it's better to have, this is regarding the transgender issue, for someone who's a transgender female, it's better to have a living daughter than a dead son. Of course, son, the male being their actual sex. It's better to encourage them to be female, which is what they want, than not encourage them and have them kill themselves. Again, this is passive-aggressive. This is pushing the responsibility for the possible death of your own child on the parents. Now, I think it's totally possible. And in fact, my sense is characteristic of parents who have transgender kids to be completely loving to them in every way, even though they don't affirm the transgender element. And if somebody wants to translate or wants to define love as affirming the transgender, and therefore you're not loving if you don't affirm it, who has done that work? That is something coming from the left. It's not unloving to disapprove of certain behaviors. The left understands this because they disapprove of all kinds of behaviors from conservatives. All right? But does that mean they hate conservatives? No, the same application doesn't apply to them. The point I'm making here is this is just simple manipulation. And therefore, I'm not going to give in to it. I'm not going to take the responsibility for those consequences. It's like saying, look, if you don't call your anorexic child fat like they think they are, then you're going to be responsible for when they die of anorexia. You're going to be responsible if they kill themselves because they think they're, this is ludicrous, obviously. But it doesn't sound ludicrous when applied to the other issues because the other issues have taken on a life of their own, a politically correct life of their own. So that it just sounds so right. Oh, you don't want a dead son. It's better to have a living daughter. Daughter in quotations because that's the trans female. So as I mentioned, this kind of challenge troubles me. It makes me angry, actually, and because of the manipulation. And I don't know that there's any way we can escape that. This is where it's appropriate for us to, as this is characteristic of Jesus, John chapter 1, full of grace and truth. I'm trying to remember how Alan puts this combination, loving and, how does he put it? Truth and compassion. Truth and compassion. Some people think a lie is compassionate. They want you to lie so that compassion will be expressed to the individual and feel comfortable in the state that he's in. I think people are committing suicide in those circumstances, whether they're gay or whether they're gender dysphoric, because there's internal problems that need to be addressed. And all we're doing is encouraging those internal problems. We are not seeking to help them. We are actually doing just the opposite. We are harming them. We are not loving them as a neighbor. We're not loving our neighbors in those circumstances. Why? Because we're creating an environment that's actually unhealthy for them, and that even when there's all this approval, they still oftentimes will take their own life. Why? It's because it's not the approval issue. It's something going on inside them that's problematic, that they feel bad about. And I mean, to say they feel bad about it is an understatement. Enough so that they think ending their life is the only solution. This is not the fault of parents. This is not the fault of friends who don't approve. There's something else going on here. And until we start taking the perspective, we need to help this person with the mental disability that is present here, what used to be called by everyone mental illness in both categories, the homosexual category and the gender dysphoric category. Everybody saw that as mental illness until the mood changed. If we treat it like that in a gracious, loving way and find ways to help them, we'll have fewer suicides. Seems to me. Well, it's kind of a sour note to end the year on, but there it is. Thank you for this year and all your support for Stand to Reason for 2024. And I look forward to your partnership in so many ways, not just financial, in 2025. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Give them heaven, friends. Bye-bye now.